Well, good morning, church, and welcome to the Friday weekend edition of the Word for You Today devotional. And today we're talking about how to handle disagreements. A couple of weeks ago in Sunday school, we finished up a lengthy verse-by-verse study of the Gospel of Matthew, learning all about Jesus. And when it was all done, I asked a student, what do you think we should look at next? And he goes, I want to study Acts. And I said, well, why do you want to study Acts? And he says, because that's where all the cool stories are. That's where all the neat stuff happens. And so that's where we're beginning. And that's where we're going to begin today. We are in the book of Acts. We are in the 15th chapter. And we're going to start at verse 36. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let us go back and visit the brothers in all the towns where we preached the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them. But Paul did not think it was wise to take him, because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark, and he sailed for Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. You know, Paul and Barnabas were a great missionary team. A lot of great stuff was happening as they worked together. And on their first tour, a young man named John Mark had been a part of their group as well. But it seems that somewhere along the way, he had grown homesick, and he returned to Jerusalem. So, when it was time for their second missionary tour, Barnabas wanted to take John Mark with them again. But Paul said no. And so, what we've got are two different styles of leadership. Paul's operating on the theory that, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You deserted me once, I'm not going to give you a second chance. But Barnabas probably had a little more grace in the situation. He saw the potential that John Mark had. And he says, I really want him to go. And they couldn't agree. And so they each went their own way. It says their disagreements were so sharp that they separated. And Barnabas took John Mark, while Paul chose Silas. Okay? Now, can you imagine that two great spiritual leaders couldn't resolve a conflict? It's true. It happens in the best of circles. Paul was the totally focused, no nonsense, let's get the job done kind of leader. Barnabas, whose name means son of encouragement, was the long-suffering and lovable type who believed in reconciliation. He believed in second chances. And he refused to strike anybody off the list. He wasn't going to give up on anyone. And there are some valuable lessons in this story about how to handle disagreements. And we're going to take a look at those today. Now, in the Word for You today, this actually covers 2 days. But since we don't have a devotional tomorrow, we're actually going to kind of go through a lot of this today. You can read part 2 on your own tomorrow, but I really want to take some time and look at all of these lessons. Because even though we've got two separate styles of leadership, both can be very, very effective. Now, the first lesson that they give us in the Word for You Today devotional is when it comes to friends and family members, we all have blind spots. Rare is the leader who has the objectivity to look beyond a blood bond and focus for what might be best for an organization. As a result, the vision that God has given that person oftentimes suffers. And it's one of the reasons we've got nepotism laws where you can't hire for certain positions a family member. Because sometimes your ties to your family get in the way of your ties to an organization. And so there's some wisdom in that because you want to be loyal to your family, but you've also got a job to do. But sometimes We need a wise and a trusted third party to help resolve some problems. When it comes to trouble in the church, Jesus laid down some clear guidelines. First, we're to go privately, one-on-one, and deal with the person that we've got an issue with. So we've got to deal with it one-on-one. Second, if that doesn't work out, then we should take one or two others and have them help us try to resolve it. And third, you must take the situation to mature spiritual leaders and get their input. And that's the scriptural way that we handle disagreements. And it needs to be our way too. And what we had here is you've got the leaders, they've got a conflict. Both want to do what's right. And so what happens? Paul goes one direction and takes Silas with him. Barnabas takes John Mark. He goes a different direction. And you know what happened? They had successful ministry take place too. It is actually a doubling of what they were able to do. That's a neat thing. And we see this sometimes in churches, where churches will have a conflict and churches will split. And two things can happen. It can get really, really ugly with a lot of name-calling and backbiting, or they can simply go their own way, talk kindly of each other, support one another, and let the ministry impact increase. Okay? Some other lessons that we learn, and these are things that are in tomorrow's devotion. Sometimes the best resolution to a conflict can be separation, even if it's temporary. When emotions are running high, we need space so that we can think clearly. We don't want to be at each other's throats. And God can use this time of separation for His glory. Because Paul and Barnabas parted, the gospel was preached in even more cities. But when a temporary separation is the best option, then you need to agree on how long it will be before you can get back together again. In some situations, in some friendships, one person may have outgrown the relationship. And so it'll never be quite the same. But this should still be handled with love and with wisdom, realizing that we can all learn from our past, from our mistakes, and we can grow through the situations that we've gone through. Later on in life, we see this in 2 Timothy. Paul says in one of his letters, "Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me in ministry." Paul saw the effectiveness that John Mark could have. And so later on, he realized that he needed him, and he brought him back. And so that was important. The fact that Paul never lost touch with Barnabas, even though they had gone their own way. He never forgot about John Mark. And when John Mark proved himself, Paul welcomed him back. Okay? Secondly, when you realize that you've been wrong, then you need to acknowledge it. Because that's going to help us move forward. Now, for a singularly focused leader like Paul, this called for him, quite honestly, to humble himself. I'm sure it wasn't easy welcoming Mark back that first time, but he knew it was the right thing to do. And so it's a comfort for us to know that somebody who was as anointed and as brilliant as Paul could rethink his position and then come to a different conclusion. That time solved the problem. Okay? That's important. Mistakes might be bad, but they're never as bad as the pride that seeks to defend them and perpetuate them. We need to learn from the mistakes and move forward. Okay? Finally, we need to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. And if you don't think that's true, you don't have to look any further than politics. We need to learn to get along. All right? We may not disagree, or we may disagree about policy, but it doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable in the process. Nowhere in Scripture do we find a time where Paul spoke publicly about his disagreement with Barnabas. They prayed for each other. They supported one another. They went about the jobs that God gave them to do. And God blessed them richly because they weren't trying to show who was the better. They were both trying to do what God was calling them to do. So don't speak ill of those that you disagree with, but find a way to support them, to love them, to pray for them, and to work together with them. The only thing that we can change, the only behavior that we have the power to change, is our own behavior. Okay? And that's why we need to find a way to work through those conflicts, how to handle the disagreements the way God would have us handle them, so that we can all learn, so that we can all grow, so that we can all move forward. Disagreements are going to be a part of life, but I love the way the devotional for tomorrow ends. That our motivation in handling disagreements the right way should be that in every way we become more and more like Christ. So let that be our goal. Let that be the word for you today, to become more and more like Christ, even when we disagree. So pray for our leaders. Pray for our leaders in the church. Pray for one another when you have those times of disagreement. And know what, church? We love you, and I hope you have a great weekend. Just a reminder, services on Sunday, 9 and 11. We are welcoming back so many more people on Sunday mornings, and we're so glad to see everyone. For those of you that are still waiting vaccines or waiting a little bit longer, we continue to have our services online, and that's going to be a long-term part of who we are. And so we're always glad to have you join us as well. And I do hope that you'll check in and let us know that you're out there watching, so that we can continue to interact with you and pray with you. We love you, church. And so have a blessed weekend, and we hope to see you Sunday.